Welcome to the Hedberg Public Library and tonight's Nancy Parker Adult Program about the Cultural Revolution in China. Our speaker is Fan Shen. As a child, he joined the Red Guard, a youth organization committed to erasing Chinese history and replacing it with communism. His book, Gang of One, Memoirs of a Red Guard, describes the disillusionment he began to feel and his transformation into an anti-revolutionary. Written originally as fiction, the book evolved into an autobiography of one man's experiences during a tumultuous time in history. After a life of twists and turns, the author now teaches English at Rochester Community and Technical College in Minnesota. Please welcome Fan Shen.
Good evening. First of all, I want to thank Linda for inviting me here tonight. What I'm going to do tonight is to tell you a little bit about my life story and how I changed from a Red Guard to a teacher here. I'm going to start with probably the most significant and most important year in my life, and that's in 1966. And that's the year when the Cultural Revolution started. Before the Cultural Revolution, my life was very peaceful. I lived in Beijing with my parents, and we were part of the elite society. My father was a colonel in the Chinese army. My mother also was an officer in the Communist Party, so they lived a very comfortable life. We lived in the headquarters of the People's Liberation Army. Before the revolution, we were not allowed to go outside to play with other children. We were taught in schools for communist officials. But in 1976, all of a sudden, my life was turned upside down. That's the year Chairman Mao started the Cultural Revolution. The purpose of the Cultural Revolution was to smash, to destroy the old Chinese culture, so that on top of it, Chairman Mao could build a new communist culture. He wanted to make sure that all future generations in China would become communists, would remain communists forever. And that's the purpose of the Cultural Revolution. The first thing he did was to start the Red Guard organization. He wants all the young people to join the Red Guard to spearhead the revolution. I was one of the first to join the revolution, to join the Red Guard. Because I thought this was my revolution, I was very, very happy to join it. Because I came from a family with a long tradition of revolutionaries. My grandfather was a revolutionary. He was about 14 when he joined the Boxers' revolution. Some of you may know this. In 1900, they tried to kill all the foreign missionaries in Beijing. And when they failed, he and my granduncle tried to escape. And my granduncle was captured by the Russian troops and was beheaded. And my grandfather narrowly escaped. And he went to Shanghai, settled down, and became a postmaster in Shanghai. And my father also joined the revolution very young. In 1937, when the Japanese invaded China, my grandfather sent my father to a mountain to join the communist guerrillas. He was about 12 years old when he joined the guerrillas. So since then, he fought the Japanese in World War II. Then he fought the nationalists during the Chinese Civil War after World War II. And then during the Korean War, he fought the Americans. And so by the time I was growing up, he was a colonel and he was doing very well in his career. My mother also joined the revolution very young. She was about 15 when she joined the Communist Party and also the Communist Army. And that's where she met my father. And when they had me, their first goal was to raise me as a communist official in the future. So I was very happy when my chance came to join the Red Guard to become a revolutionary. I thought this is my revolution. I would become a hero in this revolution. One of the first things we did as Red Guards was to burn books. We tried to collect all the books from people's homes, from schools, from libraries, and we burned all the books we could find. And at the time, all books were considered bad books because we wanted to eradicate the entire culture. Only books by Chairman Mao, by Karl Marx, by Lenin were considered good books, read books. All the others were destroyed. But very quickly, I was turned off by the revolution. I discovered that the revolution had some very unsettling cold forces. And I felt threatened and also ashamed of myself very quickly. One event that especially turned me off was one day when I went with a group of my friends to attack a doctor's house. We thought that he was an anti-revolutionary. His father used to own 2 textile factories in China, so they were fairly rich. And so we thought they were enemies of the revolution. We ransacked the house that day. We took away all the furniture, anything of value. As I was leaving the house, all of a sudden, I walked past the doctor's daughter. She was very beautiful. She was about 14 at the time. And seeing her shaking and very much frightened by us, all of a sudden I felt very ashamed of myself. And I was about actually at the time about 12 years old. I did not know at the time that many years later I would meet this young lady again, and another few years later we would get married. So it's very, very strange. But that night I learned something even worse. I learned that some of my comrades took away the doctor that night, and they took him to the headquarters of the Red Guards. And there, one of them took out a surgical knife, cut the doctor's belly open, and poured a bottle of soy sauce into his belly, and tortured him. And he died that night. When I heard the news, I was very, very shocked, and I was very, very ashamed of myself as part mate. And I never had the courage later on to tell my wife what happened at that event. But that event turned me off, and I decided that I would distance myself from the Red Guards, and I would not be part of those things. And so I started looking for books to read, to pass time. And I quickly learned that it was extremely difficult to find any books at the time. We had burned all the books, and there were still a few libraries. They were all sealed, and nobody could get in. So I was very happy one day when I learned that there was a warehouse, a secret warehouse in downtown Beijing, where Red Guards had stored lots of confiscated books to be burned later on. When I made the discovery, I decided to make a run for it. So one night, a friend of mine and myself sneaked into the warehouse, risking our lives. And we stole as many books as we could. And we stuffed our bags with all the books, mostly Chinese classics and American classics. And as we were leaving the warehouse, a group of Red Guards came from the front door. So we had to escape from the back door. And I kicked a window out and to slip out of that bathroom. And in fact, during the escape, I had a terrible cut on my hand. I still have the scar here on my hand. And but that's the beginning of my real education, because I never finished elementary school. I never went to high school. So those books were the beginning of my real education. And I remember that I burned each one of those books as quickly as I could, and because I was very afraid that someone would find that I had those books. But I kept 2 books for a long time, because those 2 books were extremely influential. I wanted to read them again and again. One book is by Jack London. It's called Martin Eden. Some of you may know the book. It's a very interesting, very inspiring autobiographical novel about his life. The other book is by a French writer, Stendhal. And the book is called The Red and the Black. I'm sure many of you know them. And both of these 2 books have one thing in common. They all had one character from a poor background, and he had nothing but ambition. And he worked very hard throughout life to achieve something. And those 2 books sowed the seed of ambition in my heart, and also sowed the trouble in my heart too. Therefore, I would get into a lot of trouble because of those 2 books. But I was very determined after reading those 2 books to do something with my life. I would not simply waste my life away. And in the second year of the Cultural Revolution, Chairman Mao decided to send all the Red Guards to the countryside to live with peasants. He said that all the red guards need hard labor to be re-educated by peasants. He thought that hard labor was the best way to ensure that all these young people would become revolutionaries all their lives. So I was sent with many red guards to a remote village in central China. We lived in a cave house for 4 years. I was there for 4 years. And in that part of the region, the weather was very dry, so we could build a cave house. As you dig a hole into the hillside, and you seal the hole with mud bricks, and that's where we lived. Life in the village was very, very harsh. I never realized that there are so many places in the body that could be painful. And we worked very, very hard on the irrigation and on the land to reform the land. But the worst part of living in the countryside was that we never had enough to eat. Frequently, we would be starving. I remember in the second year, we were in the village, we had a terrible drought. And they told us this is a 100-year drought, a very severe drought. For several months, we had nothing but very thin porridge made of corn, mixed with the grass roots and some leaves, and for several months. And we were all starving, we were all extremely thin. And then in August of that year, all of a sudden, we had a torrential rain. And it rained and rained for almost 3 days. And it triggered a mountain flood. It's really strange in that area. We never see that much water. But it triggered a mountain flood. And we all went to the river bank to see the flood. And all of a sudden we saw lots of dead animals washed down from upstream in the river. And we got very excited. And so we tried to capture those dead animals. I was one of the lucky ones. I caught a dead pig from the water. And we were so hungry, we didn't really care whether the meat was rotten. We butchered the pig on the spot and roast the pig that night. And that was one of the best meals I've ever had in my lifetime. And also, I gave part of the pig the next day to the party secretary of my village as a bribe. Because I wanted to get out of the village, I realized that life was very, very hard. I did not want to spend my life in this village. And he had the power to hold me or to release me. So I wanted to bribe him. And very fortunately, the pig worked right away there. Very, very soon afterwards, he named me the barefoot doctor of the village. The barefoot doctor at the time was a new phenomenon. Chairman Mao wanted to have one village nurse for each village in the entire China. The barefoot doctor is actually just a village nurse. That the person was supposed to work barefoot during the day with the peasants in the field. And then at night, that person would treat patients in the village. So that's why he is called the barefoot doctor. So I was chosen to be the first barefoot doctor for that village. I was very happy for that. And I was sent to a county hospital for 3 months medical training. When I came back with a small bag of surgical tools with no medicine, I never realized how much responsibility I would have as a barefoot doctor. I thought this is a fun job. I would be able to do less work in the field. But in the first week, I got a shock. A young peasant brought her 5-year-old son to me. And when I saw the terrible infection on the boy's forearm, I was just shocked. The infection was so deep, I could see the white bone beneath the skin. And the boy had a high fever, the arm was very swollen, and I realized that the boy could go into shock anytime and could die very soon. And I had no antibiotics, no other medicine. And after thinking this over, I decided to cut off the arm. I thought that's probably the only way to save the boy. And at the time, I was about 17 years old. And before that, I had never killed a chicken before. So you could imagine that I was shaking very hard and sweating quite a bit just to try to go through this. And I asked everybody to go out of the room and and I hardened my heart, and I eventually cut off the arm and wrapped it up with some herbal medicine. And miraculously, a month later, I discovered that the boy did not die, and the boy actually recovered. So I was very happy for that. And a few months later, I had another very severe case. And this one is from a fellow Red Guard. And this girl was mending a wall with other Red Guards. And one of the boys used a pick, and he swung the pick, somehow scraped the part of the eye of that girl out. And when I saw the damaged eye dangling outside of her eye socket, I was horrified. And she was just about my age. And again, I had no choice, and so I had to cut off the eye and wrap it up. And so during the 4 years I was in the village, I did large and small surgeries about 24 times. And a few times I had 2 or 3 patients who actually died on me because of the injuries. But I also saved a few people's lives. So that's a very gratifying but also terrifying experience for me. But for all those time I was in the village, my goal remained the same. I wanted to get out. I did not want to spend my life in the village to be a peasant. So finally, after some driving, after 4 years, I got my chance. I was recruited by a military aircraft factory in central China. Some of you may know the major city in central China, Xi'an. Some of you may have been there. It's an ancient capital. If you ever visit China, that's one city you must visit. So my factory was located not too far from Xi'an. Xi'an is a very, very nice city, but my factory is not. And when I got to the factory, I was very excited. It's a very modern military aircraft factory built by the Soviets. And I thought I would be able to develop myself into an aircraft engineer. I would become a scientist here. So I was very excited at first. But very quickly I found out that the factory was not what it appeared to be. There was one dark secret. Nobody mentioned it, but everybody knew about it. I found this out in the 3rd month when I was in the factory. One afternoon, I was taking a nap in my dormitory room, and all of a sudden I heard lots of noises. People were rushing around. I came out and saw people rushing to the back of the building, and I followed them. And then at the back of the building, lying on the ground, I discovered one of my roommates. And I realized that he had jumped off a 3rd floor window. And that night, he died. I was very shocked and very surprised. I could not figure out why such a good-looking young man, just engaged to be married, would kill himself. But more terrifying was that I found out that this was not an isolated incident. This happened regularly at the factory. About a month later, we had a young lady from another workshop, and she walked outside of the building after work and then lay down on the railroad tracks and killed by a train. And soon afterwards, we had another young man who was a crane operator. And after work, he jumped off the crane and landed on the concrete floor and smashed his skull. And for the 5.5 years I was in that factory, 37 people committed suicide, a very, very high rate. And the rate was so high that eventually the central government from Beijing sent a delegation to our place to find out why there were so many people killing themselves. And they stayed for 6 months, but they left without a report. So we never know exactly what happened. One of the possible reasons we all speculated was that there was a high pollution in that place. Before we assembled all the jet engine parts, we had to wash all those jet engine parts with leaded gasoline. So in our workshop, we had lots of gasoline washing machines all along the walls. Very much like family washing machines, but they were gasoline washing machines. And so the whole factory was filled with a very strong gasoline fuel. And also, most of the engine parts were coated with cadmium. Some of you may know it's a very toxic heavy metal. And we used to handle them with bare hands with engine protection. So we thought that's probably one of the reasons that many people committed suicide. Plus, the factory was an isolated place. There was no entertainment, and it's run like a military barracks. So we thought that's probably another reason. But the event that caused me to be extremely determined to do anything possible to get out of the place was the death of my best friend. And this is in 1976. And the year we call the year of the double Augusts. And in the lunar calendar that year, we had 2 Augusts. And we thought that's a bad omen. And that year, all 3 major political leaders of China died, including Chairman Mao. And right after Chairman Mao's death, one day I came to my dormitory room, and it's in the evening. I walked into the room. All of a sudden, I saw a dark spot on the window. I did not know what it was. So I walked closer and suddenly realized that it's my best friend hanging from the windowsill. And we were electricians. And so he was hanging from the electrical cord. We just saw him actually about 5 minutes ago in the dining hall. And so we were extremely shocked. And we got him down, sent him to the hospital right away. And he lingered on the breathing machine for 3 days. And then he finally died. And when he died, I was very, very horrified. I knew there's something wrong in the place, and I had to get out. But at the time in China, nobody could simply resign a job and walk off. And we could not do that. And if we simply resigned, we would become political outcasts. And we would never find another job with the state, and we would be prosecuted by the state. So we could not simply resign. The only way to leave the factory at the time for me was to go to college, which was also my dream. So I studied very, very hard during those years to try to qualify myself as a college student. I had no formal education, so I had to start from scratch. I collected all the books from my friends, all the middle school and high school courses, and every night after 9 hours work, I would study 3 to 4 hours. And so in 3 years, eventually, I finished all high school courses and some college courses. But also at the same time, I started to study Russian and English because I thought that to become a good aircraft engineer, I'd better know the languages of those 2 superpowers. So I studied very hard on those 2 languages. But after a while, I never realized that studying foreign language would almost cost me my life. In the year following my friend's death, in August, all of a sudden I was arrested by the secret police. That night I was sent to prison. I did not know what's wrong with me, what I had done to cause the arrest. The next day I found out that I was in prison because of one of my friends. I had befriended a country school teacher who taught me some English. And then they discovered that he had written an article on Chinese democracy, which was considered a high crime at the time, in fact, a capital crime. And so he was arrested, and they discovered that we had some relationship. So they arrested me too as a co-conspirator. And he was arrested in a very bad time because they wanted to suppress any kind of a dissent after Chairman Mao's death. It's a very sensitive political period. So he was executed within a week after I was there. And when I heard he was killed, I was terrified. I knew I was in tremendous trouble, and I could be killed or I could be in prison for a long time. And so when I was taken to the interrogation room, I realized my life was on the line. If there's one word wrong, I could be dead. And so, but I also realized that I could not simply deny everything. If I simply denied everything, they would be extremely suspicious of me. So I decided to talk. And all of a sudden, it just dawned on me that to be an idiot probably is the best strategy. So I pretended to be a total idiot. I had read lots of books at the time, and it's very easy for me to make up stories. If they wanted to hear one story, I would give them 10 more stories. And so I just babbled and babbled and babbled in the interrogation room. And I started to have a little bit of fun too at the time. And I discovered later on, many years later, I found that this is also a very good strategy for any bureaucrat in the world. But the babbling worked. And finally, after 5 weeks of babbling, they had enough. They actually released me after 5 weeks from prison without charging me. I was one of the few very lucky ones. In China, we have a saying, nobody ever gets out of a prison without losing a layer of his skin. And the government has always a way to can always find a way to charge you and to put you in prison for a while. So I was very lucky, and I discovered that worked really well. I came back just in time for the national examination. And in 1977, China finally declared that the Cultural Revolution had ended or had failed. And so they wanted to go back to the old system. And so for the first time in more than 10 years, China started the national examination to recruit college students solely on the basis of the academic merit. So I was very excited. I plunged myself into preparation. And after 3 months of preparing, I had the chance to go to the national examination. The national examination in my region was held in a country school about 20 miles from my factory. It's a 3-day, 6-subject, very tough examination. And every morning, I would ride a bicycle on the rough country road for 20 miles to get to that place. When I got there, I remember it's in December, very cold. It's very much like here. And I was sweating, but also extremely cold because the classroom was not heated. I remember when I was doing my first subject, which was math, I was shaking so hard I could not write a straight line and just to do the calculation. And I was trying to give myself an excuse. So I thought that's probably the reason I did so badly on my math, which was my best subject. But I learned later on that to dress myself more warmly, and I did better with all the other 5 subjects. So I was very lucky that year to pass the national exam. That year, about 6 million people took the national exam. And about less than 300,000 were eventually admitted into a college. So it's less than 4% of people who took the exam got into a college. I was one of the very lucky ones. And in college, I encountered another problem. At first, I was very, very happy. But then I soon encountered another problem. That once you are in college, at the time, you become the property of the state. The tuition was paid by the state, but the state has the power to assign you to any place it wants to after graduation. And because I did not like the political study of the college, so I got into trouble with the party members there. And the party secretary of the college immediately threatened to send me to Tibet after graduation, which is the last place any Chinese wants to go. If you go there today as a tourist, it's very nice, but no Chinese wants to go there because the altitude is very high, and most Chinese get sick very easily there. And if you have a cold, if you land in Tibet, it can become a heart attack immediately. So nobody wants to go there. So I had to work very, very hard for all 4 years to get out of that situation. And eventually also I had to use the secret police who were investigating me and to use their power to persuade the party membership not to send me to Tibet. And upon graduation, I was assigned to a 3rd largest city in China, Tianjin. I was very happy to go there. But the college reassigned me to a small campus on the sea coast. It's called Tanggu. And when I got there, I discovered that it was another terrible place. Because that place had a terribly polluted water. I discovered that all people, especially young children, they all had blackened teeth. And I found many young men in their 20s, 30s who had fractured bones, and the cancer rate was very high. In fact, I was assigned there to replace a young lady who just died of cancer. And when I discovered that, I thought this is not a place I would stay. So I had to, again, struggle very hard to get out of the place. And so I pretended I was sick. And for 6 months, I wrote lots of letters, pretending I was an idiot again, and to make sure that they hate me and they wanted to kick me out. And so finally, I got my chance to get out. Let me backtrack a little bit for the first part of my story here. I mentioned that I met my wife the first time when we attacked her house. And later on, I met her again when I was a barefoot doctor in the village. I was at an irrigation project, and I treated her when she was injured. But we did not become friends at the time. Then when I went to the aircraft factory, I found she was there too. And so we became very good friends since then. But she had a boyfriend then, so I was very envious of her, the boyfriend. And so we did not become close friends. But she became my mentors at the time. And when I went to college, she also went to another college. So we went our separate ways, and she got married. And years later, we met again in Beijing. And this time I discovered that she's divorced and she's available. So we got married. But also after that, I got a scholarship from America. And I went to Lincoln, Nebraska to do my master's degree. And then I went on to Marquette University in Milwaukee to do my PhD. And upon graduation from Marquette University, I went to teach as a professor in a college in New York for 3 years. And then I went back to Rochester, Minnesota. And this is my 10th year teaching in Rochester. And a few years after I was in the United States, my wife came. But as soon as she was here, we discovered that she had breast cancer, and it's already spread to her liver. So very soon afterwards, she died of the cancer. So that's the unfortunate part of it. Also, I want to backtrack to a small part of the years of my revolution years. I forgot to show you this part here. This is the armband we used to wear as Red Guards. And it says here in Chairman Mao's calligraphy, Red Guard, Capital Middle School Red Guard Committee. And this is the armband we used to wear as Red Guards. And also at the time, during the Cultural Revolution, people wanted to show their loyalty to Chairman Mao. So they started wearing pins of Chairman Mao. And at first, the pins were the size of a dime, very, very small. But each month, the pins increased one size. They wanted to use bigger pins to show their bigger loyalty. And this is the medium-sized pin. And by the end of the Cultural Revolution, I've seen people wearing pins the size of a plate, huge pins on their chests to show that they are the most loyal to Chairman Mao. So those are the things we used to do. Let me also show you some ironic points in my story. This is a book published, and it's part of the story I've retold here. It's part of the story in the book. This is the picture of my family here. And this picture was taken in 1976. You can see my father here was in uniform. He was a colonel at the time, and then he became a general later on. He is now retired, and he still lives in a military base guarded by soldiers, so he still enjoys all the privilege of life. My mother used to be a curator of a museum in Beijing, and she now also is retired and lives with my father. My sister is very much like me. She self-educated herself, and then she became a tax collector for the government. In a very corrupt system like China's, a tax collector does very well. So she is doing really well. My little brother, eventually, he was very cute when he was a young boy. All girls wanted to hold him. He's not very cute anymore. He grew up and he went to England, and he eventually obtained an MBA from England, and he has returned to Beijing, China, and now he works as a manager for the telephone company Nokia in Beijing. So he's doing also very well. In the picture, you can see this is taken on Tiananmen Square, the center of Beijing, supposedly the largest square in the world. And we were all holding the little red books. The little red book is the collection of Chairman Mao's quotation. And we were all holding it to show that we want to guard Chairman Mao and to be soldiers of Chairman Mao. So that's a required pose for anybody taking a picture in public. But you can see I stood slightly apart from the family because I felt really stupid doing this. Because I was really not a guardian of Chairman Mao, and I was a rebel of the family. And in fact, the editor changed the color of my book from red to blue to show that I was a rebel of the family. I also want to show you the ironic point here. Originally, the title of the book is not Gang of One, but Harden Our Hearts. This is the first line of a quotation by Chairman Mao, extremely popular during the Cultural Revolution. The quotation goes like this: harden our hearts, fear not sacrifices, overcome 10,000 obstacles to achieve the ultimate victory. And this is the battle cry for all Red Guards. Before they went into action, before they attacked their enemies, they would recite this quotation. And eventually the quotation was made into a song. And it became almost like the second national anthem, extremely popular. We sang it almost every day. I'm going to sing this song to you to give you a sense of the revolution, the Red Guards, and also the time. It's very much like rap music over here. Here is the song. "下定决心，不怕牺牲，排除万难去争取胜利。下定决心，不怕牺牲，排除万难去争取胜利。下定决心，不怕牺牲，排除万难去争取胜利." That's the battle cry of the Red Guard. Okay, eventually the title cry, the battle cry of the Red Guard, became an ironic point in my story, because many times in my lifetime I was desperate, I was losing hope, I was feeling sick, and for those times I would sing this song to myself to encourage myself, to pick myself up and fight on. So eventually it became a very ironic point in the story. So that's why originally I used the "Harden Our Hearts" as the title of the book, because I used the revolutionary slogan against the revolution. I used Chairman Mao's words against Chairman Mao himself. So that became the ironic point of the story. Okay, it took me about 7 years to write this book, and at first I was very ashamed of myself for many things I did. So I was very uncomfortable writing the book. But eventually, so that's why Linda mentioned that I first wrote the book as a fiction, because I wanted to disguise some of the things so I would feel distance from the reality. But eventually I found an agent from New York, and he advised me to change it to non-fiction, because he thought that would work a lot better. I did not listen to him at first, and then I found an editor, a very good editor, who also made the same suggestion. So finally I listened, and it took me another year to change the book from fiction to non-fiction. And this time I gave myself a name back, and I used the first-person point of view, so it becomes more direct. And I was very, very glad when the book came out. Many schools use the book in their classes. About 10 universities right now are teaching the book in their classes. And the book has been named the editor's choice by the magazine Book List. And also it's been nominated for Minnesota Book Award. So I'm very happy for that. But also I'm really worried that the book might go back to China, because nobody knows about the book in China now, especially nobody in my family knows about the book. And I intend to hide this book from my parents for as long as they live. Okay, I'm going to open up for questions, and if you have any questions about anything, I'll be very happy to answer them.
Questions? just wondering, would that book cause problems for your parents?
It's very ironic. My parents, I described in my book that my parents have been very, very worried all their lives. And even though they are founding fathers of the country and they did very well in their careers, but at the same time, they are also the victims of their own success. Throughout their lives, they have been worried that their children, their relatives might do something to harm their career. And it's a policy in China that if someone in your family who has been declared an anti-revolutionary by the government, everybody in the family will suffer. So my parents always worried that we might do something to harm me. And to give you an example, in the last 10 years, I've been back to China 4 times. And for the first 3 times, they were so worried because they are still connected to the military. They were so worried that they did not see me. And it's very strange that when I went all the way back to China, to Beijing, and then I knew they were down the street, not too far from where I lived, and I did not get to see them. It's very strange. And we called on each other on the phone, and they said that we better not to see each other. So we did not see each other. Last year, for the 4th time, I went back again. And this time I brought back my daughter and my wife. And this is the first time I brought back my daughter, their first granddaughter. And they finally came out to see me. And they did not invite us to visit their home in the military base. And so they came out of the base. We met in a restaurant outside of the base. And they brought lots of gifts for my daughter. They loved her very much. But at the same time, I could still feel the fear that so we met for only 1 hour. And after that hour, they left, and we never saw them again. But still, it felt, to me, it felt almost like the tumbling of the Berlin Wall in my family, that they came out and finally saw me after 10 years. But still, the fear is very strong there. And this is not unusual in my family, because during the Cultural Revolution, the government actually encouraged everyone to expose their relatives, their parents, their friends. And so we saw lots of people exposing their closest friends, their closest family members, and sending those people to prison. And because of that, nobody trusted anybody in China to this day. We don't talk about, when we are in China, we don't talk about politics at all. We only hint at those things, but we never criticize the government in any direct way. Because people are always afraid to this day.
What do you teach now?
I teach writing and English classes. And this is also very ironic, I will tell you. When I was in the aircraft factory, I mentioned that I started learning English and washing. And after 5 years in the factory, I had memorized the English dictionary, and I listened frequently to radio, and I thought I would never understand the language. It's so hard. And at the time, I listened to special programs of the Voice of America and the BBC. I could understand maybe about 20–30% from all those years. So I thought I would never understand the language. So it took me many, many years to eventually.
When you talk about the Cultural Revolution, what took place other than the burning of the books and the striking of fear and not speaking? Did anything else take place there in that revolution?
Okay, the revolution was a very long one. Officially it lasted 10 years. And the burning of the books was the first major action. And eventually the purpose turned to toppling all the government officials. So for about 2 or 3 years, all the Red Guards targeted the government officials, anybody in power, all the teachers. And so in fact, all the old government officials were toppled, replaced by Red Guards themselves for many years. And later on, the Red Guards themselves also were replaced by old guards again, later on at the end of the Cultural Revolution. It's a very chaotic revolution. It sounds like it had a purpose, but actually the revolution was very, very chaotic. Many Red Guards themselves eventually became the enemies of the revolution, they were prosecuted and killed too. So it's very, very ironic that very much, if you think back in the French Revolution in 1791, it's very much like that. All those die-hard revolutionaries themselves eventually were killed by the revolution itself. So it's very, very strange. Another very ironic thing for that revolution is this. Remember, the purpose of the Cultural Revolution was to smash the old culture and to install a new culture, a communist culture. But what happened was exactly the opposite. Because of the extreme of the Cultural Revolution, people still remember it very vividly today. Because of that, nobody believed in communism anymore. The idea of communism is pretty much dead in China. And even though officially the Communist Party still has 67 million members, but when I went back, when I talked to all those members, including all my family members who are all members of the party, nobody believes in communism anymore. They all believe in money. They all want to get more money, but not the idea of communism. So that's very ironic. And also the old culture, the revolution was supposed to smash, came back stronger than ever. When I went back last year, I went to the bookstores and the book fairs, and I found lots of very, very well printed old texts of Chinese classics, and a lot more than we had before the Cultural Revolution. And these texts also are taught much more rigorously now these days in schools too. So the old culture came back in force too. So that's very, very strange and very, in a sense, it's very good. The Cultural Revolution actually did something good.
Did you get a U.S. citizenship while you were here, or are you? And if so, is that a danger when you go back? It would get do anything to you because you were staying in the U.S.
Okay, let me repeat the question here. I forgot to repeat the question here. The question is that did I get the U.S. citizenship, and if that's a danger for me when I go back to China? First of all, I do have a U.S. citizenship now, and I don't think that's a major danger for me to go back to China, as long as I keep very quiet when I go back to China. And every time I went back to China, my parents told me through my sister that every time I went back, the police would be following me, and after I left, they would visit my parents and ask where I was, what I said, and so I had been followed. And so they advised me to be extremely cautious. And in fact, they ordered my wife to follow me everywhere I went when I was in China. And also, we avoided all the sensitive places in China, like here, like Tiananmen Square, which is a very political place. And anybody who has some kind of a political demonstration to do, they would go to that place. And there are lots of police on that Tiananmen Square. So we will be extremely cautious when we go back. And we don't talk about politics there. And every time I land in China, I can feel immediately the tension and also the suppression there. Even though economically speaking, China is very open and has made tremendous progress, but politically, the old system is still trying to hold on the old way. And the government still has all the power about the press, about television, about any kind of communication. Last year, when I went back to China, I went to an internet bar, and I spent about 50 cents to connect it to the internet. I was trying to do some email, and I could not find my school website. And then I tried to find some more popular websites in the United States. I couldn't find them either. And I realized that the government was using a very powerful filtering program to filter out most of the Western websites from the internet. And so they're still trying very hard to hold on to the information control. Let me backtrack just slightly also on my life here. When I landed in San Francisco, I had $100 in my pocket. And my immediate concern was to borrow some money so I could fly from San Francisco to Lincoln, Nebraska to start my graduate school. And I asked a friend of mine who was also living in San Francisco to lend me some money. He did not have the money either. He just got there too. Fortunately, he was living with a retired medical doctor, an old lady, about 80 years old. She was extremely kind, and she immediately agreed to lend me some money. So she drove us on Sunday to a cash machine. And that's the first time I saw a cash machine. And so she withdrew $400 from the machine and lent the money to me, a virtual stranger. And that's how I bought my ticket and paid my first month's rent. And also she made a call to the bishop of her denomination in Lincoln. So when I landed in Lincoln, I got in contact with the bishop and got some help from the church. And that's how I started. So I'm very, very grateful for this.
Is your book on sale?
My book is on sale in all bookstores. Unfortunately, they sold out the first 2 printings. I think they are printing the 3rd printing, but it may not come here in 2 weeks.
Are you able to write to your parents, call your parents, or is that restricted?
I do not write to my parents. I do not call them. They do not want me to do that. They are very, very afraid. So I write to my sister. I call my sister, and she is the go-between. Anything they want to say to me, my sister would tell me, and then I would say to them, to my sister too. So the only person in my family who knows about the book is my sister. Nobody else knows about the book. They would be extremely terrified if they found out about the book and saw their picture on the cover. Terrified.
I believe China's got a 1 child per family policy. Do you have any comments on that?
Sure. The one-child policy started in 1978. And before that, actually, I remember there was another policy before that to restrict the growth of population. It's called the 2-child policy before that. And after your first child, the government mandated that you had to wait 5 years before you have the second child. And that policy went on for about 10 years, and then they decided it's not strong enough. So in 1978, they officially started the 1-child policy. And they claimed that it had worked very well, and at least they reduced the population growth by several populations of France. So it's about, I think they said they saved about 100 million people from China. But officially, China now has about 1.3 billion people right now. And one of the problems with the 1-child policy these days is the imbalance of the gender. And that has become a tremendous social crisis right now. People in the government also realize this. And because in China, people all want to have a boy. And this is especially strong in the countryside. And when they discover that the firstborn is not a boy, they would find a way to abort the fetus. And so these days, for every 100 girls born in China, there are about 117 boys born in China. And right now, the gender imbalance is quite obvious. Right now, the total population, about 48% is female and 52% male. So there are about at least 10 million young men in China who would never be able to find a wife in China. So they have realized that this has become a tremendous problem. And also right now in all cities, in elementary schools, about 95% of students do not have uncles or aunts. And about 85% of high school students do not have aunts and uncles. So it has become a kind of a social phenomenon and an interesting one. But China has declared that last year that they're going to relax 1-child policy briefly maybe to address the imbalance of the population.
Do you follow the politics of China closely?
Very, very closely. Very closely.
What precipitates the concern of China and Taiwan?
That's a major issue, and very few people in this country realize how dangerous the situation is these days. China has just passed a law to prohibit Taiwan from succeeding from China, and it authorizes the government to use military force if Taiwan declares independence, and which Taiwan has every intention to do right now. Because most people born in Taiwan, they see themselves as Taiwanese, not as Chinese. And this is not an issue about the communism. And this is a very, very strange that most people do not support the communist government per se. They tolerate the government, but they probably do not support many, especially the ideology of the government. But on the issue of Taiwan, I get a sense that most people, the vast majority of the people there, support the government to attack Taiwan. So it's actually very, very dangerous. The government will probably use every force it has to attack Taiwan if it comes to that point. So I think it's extremely volatile, and the U.S. should pay a lot of attention to this.
What does Taiwan have that China wants?
Taiwan doesn't have any. Taiwan has a big territory, and nobody in China wants to see a big territory goes away. And it's a national pride. It's a nationalism. So, okay. I want to thank all of you for coming here today, and Linda has signaled me to that time. I have a few books here, and if you want to get a copy signed, and I'll be very happy to sign a copy for you. And there are also flyers free. You can take some flyers there. And if you have any individual questions, I'll be very happy to answer your individual questions. And I want to thank all of you for coming here and for all the questions. Thank you.